Ever since 9/11, Washington's been trying to trace and shut down terrorist financing. It's been relying on tips from all sorts of shadowy figures in shadowy places. But one tipster government officials say has been especially valuable is a professional researcher who spent more than 5 years investigating links to Muslim terrorism here in the United States. She just wrote a book called Terrorist Hunter. It details how groups in America have been providing significant support to terrorist outfits and how she helped track them down. Because she's written the book anonymously, we're calling her Sarah. Sarah's provided information to the FBI, the Treasury Department, Customs, the INS, even the White House. She works out of a small office where her tool is the internet, and her targets are terrorist sites like Al-Qaeda's.
This is the website where most of the time Osama bin Laden, his spokesperson, and others will release their official statements.
One of her areas of expertise is just finding the Al-Qaeda websites, which change their internet addresses every day.
So within minutes after they upload the site, we track them down and we give the address to the government.
Then the U.S. government shuts down the site. It's a game of cat and mouse. She can't tell us how to play it for reasons of national security. She did show us more examples of web pages she's located and saved in her files.
This is one thing that you can find in the internet today, the Mujahideen Explosives Handbook.
This is an explosives manual. It tells you how to blow things and people up.
Right, and it's written Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim, in the name of God.
And there's also a poison manual.
Okay, so this is nasty stuff, a poison manual and an explosive manual. Show me some nice charities.
For years, Sarah has studied how some U.S.-based charities fund Muslim terrorist groups. This charity, the Benevolence International Foundation, BIF, was recently shut down by the U.S. government. Its official website featured orphans and widows who need help.
What you see is that they really try to show their activities as legitimate as possible.
Mm-hmm. Well, who do you think they're really funding?
Oh, this is Al-Qaeda.
To make her point, she showed us a video put out by BIF that she downloaded from an Al-Qaeda website. This one's in Arabic, not English. And the pictures designed to elicit contributions are of military training camps. No orphans or widows here. So when they want to raise money from Americans, they show you the orphans. When they want to raise money from the Arabs, they show you Mujahideen. Sarah admits she's obsessed with rooting out terrorists, and to understand why, she says, you have to know what happened to her as a child. Born in Iraq to a wealthy Jewish family, life was good until Saddam Hussein's Ba'ath Party came into power.
Suddenly, the Iraqi government accused my father spying for the Israeli government. And so Saddam Hussein sent people to arrest him.
Did you see your father again?
No.
Her father had been taken before one of Saddam's kangaroo courts along with 8 other Jews. They were all convicted of espionage, and the show trial was broadcast on Iraqi TV. But Sarah didn't know that at the time. She was on her way to Israel. Her mother had known it was time to get the family out. Years later, Sarah decided to find out what had happened to her father.
I started researching the conditions, the history, what really happened at that time in Iraq, until the day when I found that picture.
What picture?
The picture of him being hanged in the Baghdad Central Square with 500,000 Iraqis celebrating.
You can hardly make out the picture now. It's from an old Israeli newspaper, and it shows a group of men, or rather bodies, strung up. One of them is Sarah's father.
And I realized that that was the end of my dreams. My father will never come back. I know that what happened to me in Iraq probably made me to be the person I am today.
And that person is quite simply a terrorist hunter. Sarah began her career by helping expose as a terrorist front a Texas-based charity called the Holy Land Foundation for Relief and Development. She dressed as an observant Muslim woman and went undercover to its meetings, where she says they were soliciting contributions for Hamas, the Palestinian organization that specializes in suicide bombers. And to establish her credentials, Sarah offered to sponsor the child of a bomber, in the language of Hamas, a martyr. And what did they say to you?
They said, we don't have any right now.
Oh.
They're all taken. I insisted.
You have to stand online to get the son of a martyr.
Oh, yes. So I said, but you know, since I'm going to do a good deed as a Muslim, I want to have it the best deed, and that there is nothing better than funding a son of a martyr. The next day, they had one for me.
And that donation got Sarah on their mailing list. One publication she received said that the charity had been approved to get money from the U.S. government through the USAID program.
Which means that for every dollar you fundraise, the U.S. government doubles it. I just couldn't believe what I was reading.
So what'd you do?
I contacted the White House, and it was stopped.
It wasn't long before the whole operation was stopped.
At midnight yesterday, the Treasury Department froze the assets and accounts of the Holy Land Foundation in Richardson, Texas.
Well, why was it so easy for these so-called charities to operate in the United States?
There is nothing better than going to save hungry orphans somewhere. You collect the money, you even actually collect money from people who don't want to fund jihad, and that's what happened with many of these charities.
Sarah says that for years, many American corporations, as part of matching funds programs, innocently and unknowingly donated money to Islamic charities which supported terrorism.
When you discover something like that,
I freak out. I freak out. They know the West so good that they know all our weaknesses and they use them all. I still freak out every time I see this.
blows your mind.
Yes!
And she really loses her mind when sponsors of terrorism take advantage of America's basic freedoms. Freedom of speech, for example.
We support Bin Laden! We support Bin Laden!
In April of 2001, Sarah arranged for the videotaping of these al-Qaeda sympathizers chanting their support for bin Laden in front of the UN. She told the U.S. government about the tape. No one was interested. But that changed after 9/11. Suddenly, Sarah says, the FBI was interested not only in the tape, but in all her work. And the government began cracking down on the charity she'd been investigating.
And you had been urging the FBI, if I understand it correctly, to do this sometime before September 11.
Yes.
And you weren't getting anywhere.
No.
But Sarah was getting deeper underground. She donned her Muslim garb, hid a tape recorder underneath, and went to mosques to record imams who were calling for jihad, holy war, against Jews, against the United States.
That's what it was like going to a mosque undercover.
I was scared. I was very scared.
Do you think you began to get a little addicted, maybe too strong a word, but do you think you began to enjoy the adrenaline rush?
Yes. Yes. If you want the real answer or not, yes, I love it.
The mosque started Sarah on a trail which ended in her biggest investigation. The most radical mosques, she says, were all owned by a single organization whose founders now had offices in a Washington suburb. The address was 555 Grove Street, Herndon, Virginia.
So here we are at 555 Grove Street. Was this your biggest hit?
Yes. It's my biggest lead to the government.
Because Sarah discovered this one building, 555 Grove, housed nearly 100 organizations owned by Muslims, most of them run by the same small group of people. Sarah was convinced she'd stumbled upon the heart of a terrorist financing ring. One night, late one night, Sarah came to 555 with some colleagues and collected the trash from the dumpsters.
And what did you find in the trash?
I found one important letter that actually gave me the first lead to understand that the money comes from Saudi Arabia.
Came from members of an extremely wealthy Saudi family, the Al-Rajis, who Sarah claims funded many of the organizations in 555 Grove.
So what we have here is just a very simple chart of how the money flows from Saudi Arabia.
In fact, it's not simple at all. Sarah mapped out how, she says, the money flowed from Saudi Arabia to a web of charities, think tanks, businesses at 555 Grove, then to offshore banks, and ultimately, she says, to terrorist groups. It's not simple because, Sarah says, it's not meant to be. It's designed to make it difficult to follow the money. And one especially inventive idea the Saudis came up with, according to Sarah, was chickens. They bought a chicken farm in Georgia.
Chicken, I see it as the best cover for money laundering.
Chicken is the best cover for money laundering.
Why? Because
Yes.
chicken is one of the things that no one really can track it down. If you say in 1 year that you lost 10 million chickens, no one can prove it. They just died. You can't trace money with chickens.
And that money lost has gone down the line to Hamas or the Islamic Jihad or Al-Qaeda.
That's what we're trying to find out.
But with Sarah's help, U.S. officials had found out enough to get a Customs Department task force to raid 555 Grove and 28 other locations in March of 2002, carting away 7 truckloads of evidence. It was one of the biggest terrorism-related raids in U.S. history. And yes, they raided the chicken farm, too. We paid a visit to 555 Grove. Sarah says her efforts stopped the flow of funds from here to terrorists. But the Muslims who work here said there never was a flow. And they point out that today, more than a year after the raids, no criminal charges have been brought against anyone. They are so incensed about the raids that they kicked us out of their offices minutes after we got there. A Muslim center across the street called the cops, and then a young man who identified himself as Suhaib Jamal came by to express his outrage. His father's office and home had been raided.
You don't go attacking innocent Americans, just because they happen to have a Muslim background or an Arab background. And these are people, some of the most law-abiding, patriotic Americans you'll ever meet, the people who were raided. And it's such a shame.
Did some of the money that was given to legitimate charities here wind up in the hands of the families of martyrs in Gaza or the West Bank? I don't know, but apparently there's suspicion that it did.
Whose suspicion, though? Who is tipping off the federal government? Who are these people in the shadows, in the backgrounds? What is their agenda?
I'm not after Muslims. I'm after hunting terrorist Muslims. Muslims, terrorists. I'm not after Islam. I'm after Islamic terrorism. It's just a small group of people that are trying to destroy our life, are doing all this damage, and we must make sure that we stop it.
You think it can happen? You think this small group of people, as you put it, can be stopped?
I know I stopped them. I know I stopped them.
You stopped a few for a day, if you'll pardon me.
I'm only one person. Hey, give me the credit.
The Al-Raji family from Saudi Arabia claims it never financed terrorists. So do the people who were raided in Virginia. So do all the charities and foundations mentioned or shown in our story. Meanwhile, the U.S. Justice Department continues its investigations. And by the way, at her request, we disguised the woman called Sarah.